they have our lead in some amazing action sequences, he's doing more than just shooting and stabbing Nazis. He's blowing them up, drowning them, running them over of tanks, and throwing them out of airplanes. He'd make B.J. Blazkowicz proud.
Shooting, stabbing, strangling Nazis.
Now, I've talked about this before in my past reviews and discussions, but we are living in the era of John Wick in terms of the types of action films we're getting in theaters and also on streaming services. I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing. While there might be a concerted effort, I think, to make the action look as good in these films as it does in the Wick movies, it's also disappointing when we get a really poor knockoff. Something like Hotel Artemis a few years ago, or even more recently with, The Beekeeper with Jason Statham. And while I love the first two John Wick films a lot, and I've said so before on my platforms, I've had my issues with the most recent two films. Not the action, mind you, but the length of those movies and a certain someone's performance. So when I heard about Sisu and how it was John Wick in World War II, I think I was both intrigued but also a little exhausted at hearing that it's another John Wick-inspired movie. But, the trailer I thought was really good, and it looked like it had some amazing, gritty action scenes. And I think I just missed it in 2023 for whatever reason. But I had time to finally check it out recently. And for those that need a bit of a synopsis, after a retired soldier discovers gold in the wild Laplands of Finland, he battles Nazi soldiers being led by a vicious SS officer who wants the gold for himself. Now, I am not going to bury the lead with this review. Sisu is badass and is a great action movie that doesn't waste a single second of your time or its 90 minutes. It is a John Wick-inspired film. Is it, a knockoff? I guess so, but it manages to capture the best aspects of the first two John Wick movies, which I do think are the best ones, that have been released, all against the backdrop of World War II. It has all the grit and all the grime you would expect. It's not clean in any sense of the word, and it delivers some brutal and gory set pieces that are really and truly inspiring. This is from the same team of filmmakers that gave us Rare Exports, which was an extremely funny and grisly Killer Santa Claus movie from a few years ago. And all the sensibilities of that genre-bending movie are here as well. If anything, this movie actually gives me more of like a First Blood Rambo vibe, like specifically that first Rambo movie, First Blood, with our lead character of a Tommy, played by Finnish actor Jorma Tommila. Hope I'm saying his name correctly. We first see him kind of struggling to live out an existence while mining for gold in the Finnish wilderness, which, by the way, is gorgeous and absolutely brutal looking. The cinematography for the film is on another level, I think, for an action movie, and perfectly blends the beauty and the harshness of Finland's Laplands. But already in the beginning of the film, we get a sense that this character, that this miner is a badass, and he has seen some shit. Like he's just like bathing in cold water and just looking mean, just like as he's pouring just buckets of what look like ice cold water on his just ripped body, which is all covered in scars and just grisly marks and everything, chap. And yes, we do get his Baba Yaga-esque backstory of his time fighting like the Red Army and killing hundreds of Soviet soldiers. I think the filmmakers themselves have stated that they were heavily influenced by the real-life sniper and badass Simo Haya, I think that's how you say his name, Simo Haya, who killed like 500 Soviet soldiers during the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union. If so, that is a great source of inspiration. And they have our lead in some amazing action sequences. He's doing more than just shooting and stabbing Nazis. He's blowing them up, drowning them, running them over of tanks, and throwing them out of airplanes. He'd make B.J. Blazkowicz proud.
Shooting, stabbing, strangling Nazis.
They used their small budget, I think, really well. And all the action scenes look great. I guess like the only criticism that I have is that there's this one sequence on the outside of an airplane. It's pretty ridiculous, and I think it might have been shown in some of the trailers. I actually suggest not watching the trailers for this movie. It is at the end, though, so I think most of us by that point, after we've seen him just, again, shoot, stab, strangle, gouge, blow up, run over as many Nazis as he has. Like, by the time he's, like, doing it on an airplane or, flopping on top of an airplane or underneath an airplane in this case, we can just kind of go with it. It's about to wrap up anyway. I think that's fine. Additionally, and I probably should have stated this at the top, but the movie's title of Sisu, people are like, what is that? Is that the guy? Is that the guy's name? Is that like Finnish for grandpa? No. But it fits perfectly for the movie. It's a Finnish term. I looked this up, and it's translated into English, or as best as it can be in English, as strength of will, determination, perseverance, and acting rationally in the face of adversity, to constantly sustain one's courage for a long time, for a great length of time. I think that's a very appropriate name for this movie in my book. It had the strength and the determination and the perseverance to stand out in the John Wick era of action films. And to be honest, this might be controversial, it's probably even better than those last two John Wick films. I would watch Sisu over John Wick 3 or John Wick Chapter 4 any day of the week. But again, I don't think the comparison's even really needed, not read at all. It's great and is a very entertaining action film all on its own, even if it might be borrowing these influences, whether it be from John Wick or First Blood or anything else in between. And I'm also just really excited to see what they're going to do with this sequel, because they said they're going to be working on a sequel. I guess the filmmakers were actually saying, like, well, it all depends on like how this movie does in the United States. Like, that's going to be the big factor where it was released there. And I don't know if it was a huge critically, it did wonderfully, a huge critical success, but commercially, I'm not actually sure how it did. But I guess apparently it has been confirmed by the filmmakers, by the director, and by a lot of people involved that they are moving ahead with a sequel to this movie, which it can. We can just go off and have, this character on another adventure fighting against probably either more Nazis or Soviets or whoever else. I mean, the potential is definitely there. And, watching the movie too, and this might feel like an odd comparison, but watching so much of the movie and seeing like all the grit and the grime and how as ridiculous as some of the kills are and some of the action scenes are to a degree, some of it actually reminded me a little bit of Indiana Jones, specifically like the original trilogy, like aesthetically, and how it's so obvious that the last two Indiana Jones films, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, most recently Dial of Destiny, just completely abandoned the aesthetic that I think helped make Indiana Jones like what it was, where it had all these wonderful like practical effects. I mean, Sisu definitely has CGI, but it uses its CGI, I think, very well. And where you don't really see it a lot of the times. But like it has so many great practical effects, and they're actually shooting on location. And everything feels so war-torn because it's war-torn Finland, and the Nazis are trying to escape at that point because the war is pretty much over for them. But it just had that feeling that I so missed watching something like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull or Dial of Destiny. I'm not saying like, and that's why Indiana Jones needs to go rated R. It needs to be a hard R, rated thing with him like smashing Nazi skulls in their faces, just, bits of blood and skull and blood and goop. It's just everywhere. I'm not saying that, but it managed to capture this like really gritty aesthetic and have it be like an action adventure film at the same time that Indiana Jones kind of used to have. Maybe not to like the bloody degree that Sisu does, but it's just like this is what was desperately needed. I mean, there's a lot of things needed in those Indiana Jones movies, no doubt about it, but it just had that. And it followed it, and this is the other thing too. in retrospect, it makes me go like, yeah, the whole idea of like Indiana Jones being fat, sad, and old, and he had all these characters like what's her name, Fleabag, going on about like you're fat, sad, and old, and I'm better, and it's like that just didn't work at all. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking with that, either in the most recent movie or in the previous one, Crystal Skull, because Sisu is an older man. He's a much older man, and in this, but there's never like a second where you go, well, that's, I don't buy him doing this. It's like you do. Like how they set up the movie, how they show him what his life is like, how harsh it is. And yeah, they build him up over time as this like, oh, you guys are fucked. You shouldn't, you're lucky that you managed to like escape. You shouldn't engage him anymore. Just let him go on his way. That's what you should do, okay? Follow your goddamn orders. But they never... but they still show that he's a human ass. He still gets fucking injured, horrifically and bloody and ripped apart and stuff. And like, that's all there. But it never once is like, well, this fat old fuck, he's sad. He can't do nothing. It's like you totally bought it. And so it's like, man, they could have had Indy treated that way too. He's just like, I'm old. I'm fucking old. I mean, I'm slightly slower, but I'm still going to kick a lot of Nazi ass and beat the shit out of you. I'm still motivated. I'm still happy to be here. It's just like, God damn it. They did it with something like this. Why couldn't they do it with something like that? And so it just, I don't know, watching it just made me think of Indiana Jones and what could have been, what should have been. But by the end of the day, like I said, Sisu, I'm hoping this turns into a cool action, like a nice period piece action fight. There's also like a little bit of like old school, like 60s, 70s World War II movies in there too. A little bit of like maybe like a Dirty Dozen to an extent. Like when they attack like the Nazi estate, kind of has that feel. It just has that kind of aesthetic, that feeling to it. Again, a little more over the top, of course, but it's like, yeah, just like those 60s, 70s kind of exploitation World War II movies or whatever. It's kind of felt that way, genre bending and all. So yeah, Sisu I think has a lot going for it. Terrific action, beautiful looking, impeccably well paced. It's like, I know they're going to make more John Wick movies and these John Wick spinoffs, but I think one of the biggest things that has personally, in my opinion, hurt the last two John Wick films is its pacing and the fact they've been too long. This was 90 minutes and there's no fat to trim. It's just, it uses its screen time incredibly well. It does not waste your time watching. And as someone who saw like, especially recently, a lot of long movies, like something like Beau is Afraid, which feels like it is wasting your time most of the time, this was so incredibly refreshing and fun. And I cannot highly recommend this movie enough. It is great. If you love John Wick, if you love First Blood, if you love those type of high quality action films, then you're going to love Sisu, in my opinion. And if you also kind of miss a little bit of that old school Indiana Jones, or maybe even something like David Ayer's Fury, kind of feels like that to a degree as well. So it's got all these little bits and pieces it's borrowing from these other movies, but making and wearing them on its sleeves, certainly. But it all just works so incredibly well. So again, I highly recommend this film. I think it's honestly... it would have definitely been, I don't know if it would have been my top 10, but it would have definitely been high on my honorable mentions, and easily, I think, blows past John Wick Chapter 4 as being perhaps the best just pure action film of 2023, which I know might be sacrilegious to say, but that's how I feel about this chap. What about you guys? I'm actually curious how many people actually saw Sisu last year. Are you curious to check this out? For those that have seen it, do you think it's better than something like, John Wick? Or do you just feel like, they could all just live in happiness together? They're borrowing from each other. That's nice. Let me know. What do you guys think?